No matter what type of programming you do, there are bound to be occasions when you need to add, subtract, multiply or divide one value and another. And so I just want to quickly look at these essential mathematical operations. And if you load up the calc.html sample page, you'll find I've got a simple JavaScript program that tests these operators out. First of all, look down the bottom of the code. You'll see I've created a form. This is an HTML form that contains various controls. I've given the form a name. I've called it calculator, and that lets me refer to it easily from my JavaScript. Now here I've got two text entry fields, one called number 1, the other called number 2, and then I've got a set of buttons, each of which performs some sort of mathematical operation by calling a JavaScript method. Let's go and look at the JavaScript. So first of all, I want to explain these two functions up here. I've got one called num1 and one called num2. They're not really necessary. They just give me a way of avoiding a lot of long-winded repetition in my code. Because when I want to retrieve a value that's been entered by the user, I need to get it from one of the text entry fields. And to do that, I need to refer to the document, that's the web page, then the calculator, that's the name of the form. Then you'll remember I called the text entry fields number 1 and number 2, so I need to refer to those. And finally, the string in those text entry fields, I retrieve the value. So that's document.calculator.number1.value or number2.value. And these functions just return the value retrieved from the text entry fields. So having defined them, instead of repeating all that reference, document.calculator, etc., in the rest of my functions, I can just call num1 and num2, and they return the values, and I can do some mathematical operation on those values. So the rest is pretty simple. Here, my multiply function simply multiplies one value by another using the multiplication operator. Then the add function does the same except using addition. Then subtract, I use the subtraction operator, the minus symbol. Divide is fairly straightforward. Again, I use the division operator. And finally, I use the modulus operator, which returns the remainder from a division, if there is any. So let's try it out. Here's the form. Let's put in some numbers. And when I add them, 105, as you'd expect, I subtract the second from the first, that gives me 95, I multiply, gives me 500, divide, gives me 20, and modulus, well, there is no remainder, so I get 0. Let's change this to 102 and try the operation again, and this time the result is 2. So that is a quick and simple look at the essential mathematical operators defined in JavaScript. Now here's a slightly more useful program. It also does calculations, but this time it performs the calculation based on a subtotal. For example, if somebody's ordered a product and they enter the subtotal in this top field, and when I click the button, the tax that's owed upon this, I'm assuming 20% rate of tax, is calculated, and the grand total just adds the tax onto the subtotal. And whatever the user enters, the calculation is performed to work out how much is owed, including tax. So let's take a look at the code. Well, first of all, I've got another form down here. I've still used the name calculator, which lets me refer to the form from my JavaScript. I've got the text entry fields, one for the subtotal, one for the tax, and one for the grand total. And I've also given those names, which I can use when referring to them in my JavaScript. When the button is clicked, it calls the calc function, and that's declared up here. And you can see what this does. First of all, I have two variables. The subtotal variable gets the value that's entered in the subtotal txt field, which is found in the calculator form, which is on my document, and it converts it to a number. I'll explain what's going on when I convert a string to a number in a subsequent video, but for now, just bear in mind that it returns a number and it assigns it to the subtotal, and then it calculates the tax by getting the subtotal value, which I've just calculated, and multiplying it by, in this case, 0.2, that's to calculate 20%. Then I refer to the value of tax.txt, that's another text field, and I place into it the value that I've just calculated, that is the tax. And finally, in the final field, grand total txt, I add tax onto the subtotal to calculate the grand total. So that's all there is to it. It's quite a simple program, and yet I've got a fully working tax calculator which could be used for all sorts of different types of calculations on a web page.